Well, good day, everybody. Welcome to episode 009 of Code While. In this episode, there will be some exploration of some JavaScript quines. A quine is a computer program which produces its own code as output. And so there will be some of these explored here. At the top of this page is a QR code. If you'd care to, you can scan that code and follow the resulting link to reach the same web page where all the same code examples will be available. All right, let's take a look here. What's the first quine here? All right, well, first, I would like all these code examples to be pastable into any JavaScript environment, including Node.js. And so the first thing I'm doing here is I'm checking if the type of the window identifier is not an object. I'm going to make an object called window. And that'll sort of simulate, roughly speaking, a browser environment in Node.js if that's necessary. I'll evaluate that. Okay, here's the first quine. Let's explore this here. I've made window.quine1 underscore function. It's a function, and there's a little space here. Well, why the space? I encountered an old version of Mozilla Firefox, which actually rewrites any function that you give it. If you have an anonymous function and you execute the .toString function for that function, it'll have rewritten the function, the anonymous function, and injected a space in between the function keyword and the left and right brackets. So just to deal with that quirk, to make sure that the quine works out and gives the same output as the code that goes in, I've introduced a space here. What is this function doing? Okay, the first thing it does is it returns something. And what is that something? It's an expression. Here's the end of that expression. Okay, but what's with this 0 and a comma here? That's to deal with another web browser quirk, and that's Microsoft Internet Explorer 6. Microsoft Internet Explorer 6, if you have a function and you've got any number of left and right brackets around that function, those will be incorporated pardon me, into the string representation of the function through the toString function. And I don't want those, so I've managed to find a workaround here by using the comma operator. This 0 will be ignored. The result of the comma operator will be the second operand, which is just the function that we see here. And so all this does is get rid of the left and right bracket that was around this function. All right, so how does this work? This is returning that function and calling it with this and arguments as arguments to that function. This is going to correspond to whatever object this function was invoked as a member of, if any, and arguments will correspond to the arguments that this function is called with. And these might be useful in a future episode, so I'd like to keep them around by passing them in as arguments here. All right, what does the body of this function do? Quine middle function takes original this and original arguments, and then it has some variables, quine beginning, quine middle, quine ending. The beginning part is just a static string. Here I've got function, a space, left and right brackets. This all seems familiar. All of this is all of this right here. This highlighted portion is all of this string here. Then for quine middle, I'm assigning to that the the string representation of the quine middle function. So that's going to take all of this here, this function. That'll be the middle portion. And then the ending part is going to be everything after that function. All of this down here is going to be the ending portion. And then it gets assembled together, quine beginning plus quine middle plus quine ending equals quine. And the next thing to do is to deal with further browser quirks. I'm going to check the quine middle, which corresponds to this function here. I'm going to look to find out if it has no line feeds inside of it, if the matches are null, then I'm going to replace the carriage return line feed sequence in the static portions, found in the static portions of the beginning and ending. I'm going to replace those sequences with just carriage return. Some browsers might expect a carriage return as the line termination character or sequence. And the same thing again for other browsers. I'm going to check if the middle portion doesn't have a carriage return in it. Then I'm going to replace the sequence of carriage return line feed with just line feed. And that'll make it the same output for those browsers that expect that line termination. All right, and then I just return the quine. That's all this does. Okay, does it work? Here I've got an expression. I've spread it out across a few lines so that you can read it more easily than if it was on one line. And it's checking if we call that function, is the output equivalent to looking at the string representation of that function via toString. And it returns true. They're equivalent. So this quine works. Pardon me. And what's next? Well, what if we could get rid of named functions and named arguments and variables? Is that possible? Sort of clean up what's in the scope of this function here and leave it mostly empty? Well, yeah, we could do that here. Here's quine 2. This time, the outer return, is returning still an expression, but this time it's got an object inside of it. And here's the end of that object down here. And it's going to invoke a quine middle function property of that object this time. So how does this go? It's all the same stuff with just enough adjustments to use an object instead of a named function. Now, because this quine middle function is invoked as a property of this object, it'll have a this available. And so that'll be this. Instead of variables, this.original this will be assigned to argument 0. So it'll be populated by this argument, this. This.original arguments will be populated by arguments 1, which is this one, the original arguments to the outermost function. And then the same kind of assembly process, this.quine beginning, quine middle. This time I'm using this.quine middle function.toString to get the content of this function here. And then assembling it together again and doing the same line termination checks and possible replacements, and then returning the quine. So it's almost the same thing, just a slight few differences here. Now this return is returning an expression with an object inside, and it's being called down here. Those are some slight differences. Does it work? Quine 2? Yes, it works. All right, that's good. Well, how about further adjustments? What about redoing the same kind of strategy using return and an expression with an object and then calling a property of that object? Let's nest one more level deeply. This time, this function for quine middle function is just going to do the same thing. It's going to return an expression with an object, but this time it's going to invoke a make_quine property for that object. And that's going to be this function right here. But this inner object, now it's going to have some properties specified directly here. Original arguments will still be arguments 1. Original this, argument 0. This time I'll also include a reference to the outer object. This is an inner object, and this is going to refer to the outer object. I might as well include a reference to that. Outer object will be this, and the quine beginning is specified directly here as a string for this property. Quine ending specified directly. And how has this makeQuine function different than in the previous iteration? Well, this time it doesn't need to deal with the beginning and end assignments, so it just skips to the middle. It calls this.outerObject, which it has access to, dot quine middle function dot toString. That's how it's getting the text representation. And then the same assembly and the same checks for line termination and possible replacements. So this should amount to about the same thing. Check it here. It does. Well, that's good. Okay, but this is starting to get carried away here with indentation. Boy, that might be nice to remove later on. Okay, is there another way that we could achieve this same thing without using this outer object with the quine middle function property? Well, there is. We can do that with an array. Now this return, I'll read it up here. Now this return takes an array, and down here we see this is the end of the array. It has an element 0, and what is that element 0? It's this function here. So it's going to take that element, that function, and call it with this and arguments. Same as before. This time it won't have the quine middle function as the name. All the rest of this content is the same still. This has been changed now to reflect the usage of an array. And down here, we access that outer function with this dot outer object element 0, just like here. Does this work? True, it works. Okay. How about doing something else here? We used an array up here, so now that's a good reminder that we can use an array for convenience for the beginning, middle, and end quine parts. So that's what I've done in this iteration. Now I've removed quine beginning and quine end. I've made a quine parts array with those portions with a null in between them. And instead of dealing with the beginning and end by name, now they're going to be elements of this array. So the first thing I do here is I assign to the middle element, which was null, I assign it to this dot outer object 0, the function, toString. And that populates this middle element. And then I'm going to join those elements together of that array and use that to populate this dot quine. Other than that, everything's the same. So it should work out. Quine 5 test. It works out too. Okay. What's next? All right, all of that indentation was starting to get carried away. So what I've done in this iteration is it's the same as the previous iteration, only except for the spacing. I've unindented all of the properties of the inner object, and I've removed some of the new lines and spaces that were before and after. So all of this is the same as before, but just all on one line. And then down at the bottom, all of this is the same as before, except on one line. And as a bonus, not only does it look a little nicer here with the property names on the left and their values on the right for the inner object, but now all of that dealing with the carriage return line feed business is gone. It's not needed anymore. So it's been stripped out of the beginning and end portions of the quine, and it's been stripped out of the body of the make quine function. It doesn't need to be checked for. No replacements are needed anymore. So it's a lot simpler this way. Does it work though? Quine 6 check. It works. All right. Okay, well this make underscore quine function on the inner object, this is just some arbitrary name. A quine produces its own code as output, but maybe you might like to do something more, so have some other features or have some other forms of output. So that's possible. We can replace this make quine with something else and have making a quine just an option. How might we do that? Maybe something like this. This time at the bottom here, I'm calling a main property as a function. And here is a new main property as a function. And just for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to return this dot make quine. So it's still going to have the same output. but now there's this layer of indirection. I'm using main instead of make quine directly. And the implication here is that we could do something else in this main function. We don't have to call make quine. There might be some other means of specifying what this entire affair should do, and maybe one of those desires could be to make a quine out of the whole affair. All right, does this still work? Check for quine 7. All right, evaluate that. True, that's still a quine. All right, and how about this final iteration? Quine 8. In this iteration, from the main function, I'm just going to return this, which is the inner object. It has all of these properties here. I'm going to return this, and it's up to the caller to do something with it. Take this object. They can make a quine if they want. They can inspect the quine parts. They can do whatever they like. So that's going to be different. This is no longer a quine, a strict quine, because the output is going to be an object with the capability of making a quine of the original affair. And what do we get from this? This time, I'm going to check that it works as expected. I'm going to call quine8 underscore function, get the resulting object, that's the inner object, and then invoke the make quine function of that inner object and test that for equivalence with the original function's string representation. And that works too. All right. Well, none of these quines work in Apple Safari 3.1.2 for Windows, Microsoft Windows. Just let you know. It's difficult to achieve 100% browser compatibility or JavaScript environment compatibility. All right, and here, what did we get out of this object? One way to find out is I'll make a Q8 test, and what's it going to be? Here, I've got an expression with an object inside of it. That object has a property called answer with value 42, and then the quine8 function is going to be a property called quine8 function for this object. And then I'm going to invoke that quine8 function property of that object and going to pass it arguments 1, 2, and 3. So the function is going to receive this object as the this identifier and these 3 arguments. So after that's done, next I'll make an array where I'll have the result Q8 test, and I'll inspect original this.answer. That'll be the first element of this array, and original arguments element 2 will be the second element of this array. Then I'm going to join those 2 elements together with a new line just to make some output so that we can take a look at what we got from that quine8 function. If I evaluate that, I get 42 and 3. The answer of this initial object, that was the this, is 42, and argument 2, 0, 1, 2, is a 3. And here's 3. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll hope that you'll join in another episode of Code While. Thanks, and take care. Goodbye.